All right. So this is my weekly vlog. Last week I did a streetwear review where I took a look at a lot of clothing that people sent in to me and all that kind of stuff. And this time around, I figured that instead I would ask for some questions on the No Jumper Twitter. And I asked away, and you guys gave me a bunch of different topics that you wanted me to discuss. So I'm going to do this vlog kind of based on the different ideas that people threw out my way. So here's the first question. It's from Brandon Ostrach. He said, why'd you get into the podcast, and who inspired you to start your own brand and all that jazz? So I figured I'd take on this one first. What got me into doing the podcast? I was sitting at a cafe in Barcelona maybe 4 years ago. I was with my friend Michelle, who I just met at that time. She's a DJ, 90s hip-hop DJ that my friend Catfish had just introduced me to, and I was sitting there with her at a cafe in the middle of the day. She told me that she learned how to DJ from Spinderella from Salt and Pepper. So I thought that was pretty interesting. I sat there and I had like an hour-long conversation with her where I was just sort of asking her all the different details. It really kind of got my brain sort of going down that pathway of just like asking her every relevant thing that I could think of that would relate to her career that she was apparently pretty successful with. And it just kind of occurred to me at a certain point, like, damn, I actually feel like I'm kind of good at this, and I really enjoy it. I really like just like taking somebody that I don't know anything about and just sitting there and just learning as much as I can about them. So I had that idea fresh in my head for a while, and I had a few little false starts in terms of doing the BMX podcast. I didn't have a store back when I started, so I was doing them in my living room. And eventually I got pretty consistent with doing the BMX podcast, and I'll admit I was super nervous at the beginning to get started, you know, just because I was worried that the equipment wouldn't work right or that the footage wouldn't work right and everything like that. But I knew that the important thing was that if I just got started, if I just started to work towards my goal of having a podcast, that, you know, I would get less and less nervous every single time I did it. You know, I didn't know that I was going to be good at doing the podcast, and I didn't know that I was going to get any kind of success. The only thing I knew that I could guarantee was that I was going to be consistent and I was going to do it every single week. That to me is like the biggest thing. Like if you're going to get into anything, like if you're going to decide that you want to be a writer, the most important thing is that you write consistently and that you actually set aside some time and get into a schedule so that you can just do it every single day or as often as you want to do. If you want to get into, you know, becoming an athlete, any kind of athlete, like if you decided tomorrow that you wanted to be a BMX rider, the most important thing, the only thing that you can control is just your consistency and how often you go out and actually ride your bike. You can't control if you get good at it. You can't control anything else besides that. And that's like the most important thing to me when you get into anything is if I'm going to get into something, I'm going to give a wholehearted effort. For me right now, it's like I don't feel 100% comfortable sitting here and talking into a camera. Like this is still a little bit awkward for me. I still have to like find time at night to like go away from all the people I know and everything to sit here and talk into the camera. I mean, that is its own challenge for me now. It's just getting more comfortable vlogging, which, I mean, it might sound kind of ridiculous because, you know, vlogging seems very indulgent, very like, ooh, look at me, I'm hanging out, I'm talking to you in the camera. But the truth is that this shit is difficult. Like it actually is, you know, it takes a certain degree of humility and self-awareness to sit there and talk into the camera and actually try to be interesting. This is something that I want to just do over and over and over consistently enough that hopefully I'll get comfortable enough that it won't feel like a big deal. And that's kind of where I am right now with podcasting, is that at first, even the little BMX podcast would stress me out like crazy beforehand. And I'm talking like interviews with dudes that I know well, so they shouldn't stress me out at all. And when I think about it now, I don't really understand what the fuck I was stressed out by. Now, I mean, like the other day I interviewed fucking Dylan Francis. He's got 1 million Instagram followers, and I barely knew shit about him besides the fact that he's funny on the internet. I mean, that's like a whole different level of pressure when you're actually working with somebody who's really like, their time is really valuable and like they're important and you know a lot of people are going to see it. I mean, that's a whole nother level of pressure. But even with that one, I didn't really feel any pressure beforehand because I've done enough podcasts now that I've started to just feel comfortable with it, you know? And that's what's cool too, is that like with the BMX one, I was able to sort of build on that. After I had done maybe like 20 or 30 of them, it started to occur to me like, all right, I'm going to start branching out more and start trying to work with rappers. I'm going to start trying to work with dudes who have clothing lines, people who have clothing lines in general. And I really am just addicted to that rush, that thrill of figuring out somebody that I think would be a great interview, getting in touch with them, getting them to agree to do the interview, and then actually doing a good job with the interview, and then getting the interview out to as many people as possible, and then reaping the rewards, even though the rewards of doing that interview might only be like, okay, I got a bunch of SoundCloud followers. Oh, we got, 10, 20, 50, $100 off YouTube. It's the rewards aren't really that great, but even just being able to do a podcast with some underground rapper and then see that he shared it on his SoundCloud and he got us a couple dozen new followers on SoundCloud, or he, his fans went on our YouTube and we got a couple dozen more subscribers on the YouTube. Like, I get a huge thrill out of the rush of like creating something online. That's the biggest thing for me. Honestly, I'm just really addicted to the process of doing the podcast and just the feeling of just building up an audience and just getting more and more people who'll check my shit out. I mean, it's the biggest fucking thrill in the world, and it's like the most fulfilling thing too. Like, when I think about my life now, I just constantly feel like I have this real challenge, this real source of something that I think it's important, in the sense that, like, I feel like a lot of people are affected by it. It's important to me on a personal level because I think it's really helping to build like my brand and my voice in terms of people knowing who I am and giving a fuck about what I have to say about anything. And as well as that, like, it's just fun, and I mean, it makes a little bit of money. It's just, I'm just like addicted to the process of it, to be totally honest with you. So what was the original question I was dealing with here? Oh yeah, why'd you get into the podcast? I just wanted to have conversations with people. I just wanted to put myself out there. The biggest one for me in recent memory, Beagle, the skate filmer who I had on the podcast. Like, I always would watch his videos on YouTube where he had a bunch of little interview videos. When I first found out about him, I would watch him and I'd just be like, yo, this dude is the fucking shit. Like, he's so cool. He just seems like the illest dude. Like, I would love to meet this guy and actually just get a chance to have a conversation with him. I remember thinking that, even like without planning on doing a podcast or whatever, to have the podcast be at the point where I was able to actually reach out to him and say, hey, are you down to do this interview? And to have him actually be like thankful for the opportunity because he's seen the fact that the podcast is popular and that it is making an impact. I mean, for that to happen is just crazy. Like, that just makes me feel like, holy fuck, this shit is really actually working. This question is coming from Max_Friedman_9. He said, when did you notice that your podcast was starting to get big, and what do you plan to do in the future for the podcast? All right, so when did I start to notice that it was getting big? Well, that's an interesting question because, I had a bunch of like early successes that were kind of impressive to me at the time, or they seemed like a big deal. Like, getting the Ian Connor interview early on was a really big deal because obviously he's probably the most famous person that we've had on the podcast. Like, a ton of people got turned on to the podcast through that, and that was just a huge one. Ian Connor and Shane Gonzalez, like, I owe them big time for actually like trusting me to interview them because I didn't have that much of a repertoire or a resume going on for me at the time. We just happened to have a friend in common, and he just happened to reach out, shout out to Trev, and make it happen. So I don't know, like, that was a fucking huge one in the beginning. I feel like the Puya one was a huge one too. Obviously, Puya is pretty respected and well known in the underground, and that just, I think a lot of people like learned a shitload about him. He's somebody that had never really done an interview like that before, so for his fans, that one was like gospel. Like, they all had to go and watch it. And that was probably the first one where I started to like go out to like a show, whether it was a Sesh Hollow Waterboys show or a Puya show or whatever, and all of a sudden I had like dozens and dozens of rap fans coming up to me and saying like, yo, I fuck with the interview that you did with Puya. Like, that just started to have like a really crazy effect. And then I think when it really hit its fucking stride though was when I did the Suicide Boys interview, because that one, not only were they like a couple rappers who were like on the verge of like really taking off, like, not only that, but that interview I think just really, really delivered, in the sense that I think that their fans really appreciated it, and that it was very inspirational, which is, I think, like a big factor when it comes to a podcast being popular or not. Like, I think that one in particular, people watch it and kids just get inspired. Like, it really makes them feel like, fuck, I can do it too. And I think that created like a big viral effect for that podcast in particular, where it just had like an uplifting feel. And I think a lot of kids started to share it between each other because it just gave them the feeling of like, damn, if these fucking white trash kids can come out of nowhere and make something of themselves this fast, no offense, you guys, you're a little white trash, it's all right. I look at the Suicide Boys one as sort of being an example of like, oh, this podcast could have done 20 or 30,000 views and not help the artists out that much, but instead I did a really, really good job. Or, it's not just me. It's not like I just did a really good job, but I did apparently a pretty good job. But then also they were just amazing guests. That combination took it from where it might have been like an average podcast for me, where they got 20, 30, 40,000 views or whatever, and just blew it through the roof just on the strength of the content. The proof is in the pudding. It's almost 200,000 views already. So shout out to the Suicide Boys. Those guys are fucking awesome, and I want to work with them more in the future. But, those ones all stood out to me like crazy. But the other thing is that right after I got the Suicide Boys podcast, I got the Antwuan Dixon podcast. Or I think I got that one actually right before Suicide Boys. And that one was really sick just because that's like Antwuan, anybody who knows about him knows that he's a fucking legend. But a lot of people also probably never thought that I'd be able to get him on the podcast because he's notoriously like kind of tough to get his hands on. So getting that was a really big deal, especially after the fact that he did get arrested the first time we tried to do the podcast. That was a big deal. Right after the Suicide Boys one, I got Tyler Grosso. And that one was like a sleeper that I did not know was going to blow up. I got a shitload of views right away. It got a big Complex article. Complex made a video about it. That sent the subscribers through the fucking roof temporarily. That one has over 100,000 right now. So that one was a really big deal. And then like I got Getter that same week, and that sort of opened us up more to like the EDM audience. And I guess that's just what I'm really, really hooked on, is just that feeling of like every single week, or even a couple times a week, putting out a new podcast and getting new people to find out about it. Like, it's just such an addictive feeling, constantly being on like a mission. Like, I need to get more people to find out about this. And then just having such a good mechanism in place in order to get it out to more people, because every single time I do an interview with an artist, obviously the vast majority of the time they're sharing it on social media. They're going to share it on SoundCloud. I need that SoundCloud repost. If possible, I'm not afraid to ask 3 times for the SoundCloud repost, because that shit really does help so much. Look at like an A&R for a label. An A&R for a label is in the position to help out, young artists, to try and help people out. So they go and they find an artist that they believe in, and then they sign them to the label or whatever, and they put some effort into them. They put some attention into them. And they try to help him out. They try to like help him get some songs that are going to be cracking off. They try to, work with him on his image, work with him on his videos and all that kind of stuff. And I think that would be really cool to work in the music industry to that extent. But here's the thing with me, is that I'm actually in the position of trying to do basically what an A&R does, but I'm trying to do it with like a couple different people a week. I'm trying to find underground artists that are starting to bubble up, and then just reach out to them, do the interview, and then my podcast becomes sort of a part of their whole story as they're coming up. Because then anybody who becomes interested in, I just did the Wi-Fi's funeral interview, and they're relatively underground, but they do have, 20,000 on SoundCloud, and they're starting to pop off. But, I did that interview, and it's dope because a lot of people were curious about them. I just did the Divine Council interview. There's another one. They're like pretty underground, but they're taking off. And so by doing the interview with those dudes, then my podcast gets to be sort of an integral part of their whole come up. If it's in 3 months, or if it's in a year, if it's in 2 years that they really start to blow up, then people will be able to look back and say, oh, there's that podcast they did. So not only do I get to help them, but I also get to sort of reap some of the rewards as they get bigger from there. And then the really dope thing about it too, though, is that I can work with a lot of people. Like an A&R, they're really incentivized to like only take on as many people as they can realistically work with. For me, it's like, okay, I was fucking with Lil Yachty. I was fucking with his music. So I got in touch with him. We talked. I was like, oh, let's do this interview. And it worked out great. And it took a couple hours out of my day. And like, for me and him to be able to work together like that, and now it has a shitload of views. It has a shitload of people probably finding out from him about that. A lot of his fans are probably finding out about the No Jumper podcast from him. So it's just like a super mutually beneficial thing. And like somebody like Lil Yachty, like he's super fucking thankful. He's been FaceTiming me with Coach K saying thank you and shit. And that's just the coolest thing in the world. I helped a 17-year-old kid out enough that he really is like thankful. Like he's really this means something to him. It's an amazing feeling. And the fact that like there's not a lot holding me back. Like I can have those kind of conversations with a lot of people and be able to help a lot of people. I mean, that's a fucking awesome feeling. And somebody asked, who would you really want to interview? They said, who would you be your top 3 interviews or whatever? And I was sort of thinking off the top of my head. So I said, A$AP Rocky, Chief Keef, Danny Brown. And those are all super true. Like I really, really want to interview all 3 of those guys. Obviously, they're all on a different level than anybody else that I've interviewed, really. It would be a huge boost for the podcast. And I fuck with them all a lot, like as people, like Danny and Rocky, they just seem cool as fuck. So to me, it's like I would love to interview those guys just because I would like to have a conversation with them. But this is the thing. This is what I was thinking about. As much as I would like to interview Rocky or Danny Brown right now, what I would really like is to have interviewed those dudes at the very, very beginning of their career, because that would have been the fucking crazy, exclusive, dope-ass interview that would have, helped the podcast like crazy, and that probably would have been super illuminating and revealing. I would love to interview those dudes right now, but the truth is that they've already done a lot of good interviews. What I would really get excited by right now, like, to be honest, like, I would rather interview Kodak Black or Playboi Carti or Maxo Cream than any of these like top name rappers that sell 10 times as many tickets as them. Like, I would rather get a Maxo Cream interview all day than get a 2 Chainz interview. And I fuck with 2 Chainz. Like, I like 2 Chainz. He's a dope rapper. He's made a lot of awesome songs. But Maxo Cream, to me, is like, I haven't seen like a really great long form interview with him. And to me, he's like one of the dopest rappers that has come out in a long time. And I'm supposed to interview him next week, and I'm extremely happy about it. Do I want to interview top name rappers that are like huge names? Yeah, of course. But what I really want to do is get those types of dudes when they're really early in their career. Like, getting Lil Yachty to me was a huge thrill because I'm confident in him and I like believe in what he's doing. And I think that he's probably going to be in the rap game for a long time to come. So there's going to be a whole shitload of people that are going to be finding out about Lil Yachty over the next couple of months, next couple of years. And to anybody who searches his name, they might just figure out that the best thing that he's done so far is that he had a cool fucking podcast with this thing called No Jumper. So yes, it's dope to get to work with big name, major label artists or whatever. And I hope to do more of that in the future. It would be a really amazing look for my podcast if I were able to say, hey, I interviewed A$AP Rocky, who's super famous and super dope and has sold a shitload of records. That would be awesome. But it's almost more important to me to get the Kodak Black. It's cool to talk to people that are cool, but what's really cool is to break people that are cool, to like show that they, that you knew about them a little bit early on and you were willing to like co-sign them before it was super obvious that they were going to be a star. Somebody asked, what's your favorite podcast and why? I'm going to give a shout out to a little podcast called The Great Debates. I got turned on to this podcast through BJ Novak, who I do not know in real life, but I was listening to an interview with him, and he said that he really fucked with it. So I got to send a shout out to The Great Debates. Is this going to... There it is. Yep. I got to send a shout out to The Great Debates. It's basically... so if you remember the concept of like debate class in high school, to me, I was someone that did horribly in high school, but I remember always thinking about the concept of a debate class and being like, man, that sounds kind of cool. Like, I like the idea of competitive, organized arguing. But I never went through with it. And I found out about this podcast that basically takes the format of being in debate class and it just spins it on its head and makes it as weird as possible. So basically there's 2 dudes on the show and they each pick opposing sides of an argument, and then the argument takes place, and then there's a moderator and he gives his feedback on what he thinks of the arguments made here. And so examples of topics that have been discussed on this, like all the episodes are actually named after the primary debates that they have. So like one example of an episode was the beach is fun. So one person on one side has to take the argument of the beach is fun, and they have to try to argue that the beach is fun, and then the other side has to argue that the beach isn't fun. And of course, it doesn't matter if they agree with this argument or not. And a lot of times the topics that are being argued are completely ridiculous and just super out of this realm. Just to give you an idea of the kind of things that they argue about, one argument or one debate was parades are a waste of time and resources. So another one, the weatherman has the easiest job on a news team. Next one, it's better to be a wizard than a knight. All right, so I know that you're thinking that a lot of these seem really obscure and weird and they don't even really make sense, but that's why it's so fucking awesome. So I would have to recommend The Great Debates as an excellent podcast you should go listen to. And also, I really want to do an episode where we interview the great debaters on No Jumper so you could learn even more about them. Apparently, it's pretty hard to get them in the same room. I hit up Steve Healy, and I told him, hey, I want to have you guys on the podcast. He said it might be kind of hard to make it work. I figured that I would mention it in this podcast, show them some love. Maybe they'll get a bump in terms of subscribers or followers or something, or at least tweets. If you tweet at them, Great Debate 69, and maybe they'll come and they'll do the podcast and we can actually get some good debates in. So There's a lot of podcasts I love, but in this instance right here, I'm going to just show love to the Great Debates, because that is definitely my podcast that I go to when it's like, oh, I want to listen to something funny. Because a lot of times I try to listen to something funny before I do my podcast. It gets me in the mood to try to be clever and try to make people laugh on air or whatever, even though I don't know if I ever really succeed. So shout out to the Great Debates. And then final question. This one's from Tower_Christ. He said, where do you want No Jumper to be in 1 year? Well, that's actually a really interesting question, because the truth is that I just want to keep doing what I'm doing right now. And I feel like if I keep what I'm doing now going, that in a year it could be in a completely different place. Like, honestly, I just want to keep going ahead as hard as I can with the podcast thing and just keep repeating it over and over and over. And I feel like if I keep repeating it over and over, I'll eventually get where I want to be going, which I don't really know where that is. I just want to have a podcast that is able to affect a lot of people, and I want to be able to really help out artists. And like the feeling, like right now, if I put out a podcast with some like unknown rapper, it'll definitely get like 10,000 views on YouTube, and that's a pretty good feeling. But imagine if I were able to have such a big audience that I could put out an interview with some unknown rappers and it would get 50,000 or 100,000. I mean, that would be even sicker. So, I mean, if I could grow my podcast as much as I can, then just more good things will come. You know, it's basically like I really like podcasts because it incentivizes you to just do good work. There's no flim-flammery. There's no bullshit. There's no like cheating your way to the top. It's basically just, hey, you do the best content that you possibly can, and then the better a job you do, the more people will find out about it, and the more people who find out about it, and the more people who listen, the more money you make, the more attention you get, the more opportunities that you get from it. So I'm not doing it for the money, and I'm not doing it for the attention, but I'm definitely just doing it to do the best job that I can. And it's something where the better a job you do, the more love you're going to get, the more successful you are. So that's how I see it. I guess before I get off air here, if you're a fan of No Jumper the podcast or the vlog that I'm doing right now, support my clothing line, onsomeshit.com, right here. This is an example of a t-shirt that we sell on our web store at onsomeshit.com. I just grabbed this off the shelf. Of course, I record these vlogs in the back of the OSS store. Here's something else. Here's a hat. This is a hat I've seen Nick Coletti wearing at length a lot in public, and oftentimes the same logo on his shirt. It has a picture that could be conceived of as being my cat. That's pretty tight. So check out onsomeshit.com if you're interested in what I have going. And this week, we've got a shitload of other good podcasts that are coming your way. We got Dylan Francis and Blake Vapes dropping this week, and probably a few more, too. We got fucking Dylan Ross coming through as well, as long as we're sticking to the Dylan thing. And probably some other fucking good ones, too. Max O'Cream's supposed to happen this week. So anybody, I hope you enjoyed this vlog. If you want to do me a favor, go to onsomeshit.com, or just tell people to subscribe to this podcast, tell people to follow it, tell people to check it out, tweet about it, Facebook about it, tag us so that we can see you showing love, give us an Instagram shout out, do whatever you got to do. We really appreciate it. Tell a friend to tell a friend. Tell someone in real life. That's the best way to recommend anything online. Just, find somebody and tell them in real life. But this has been the second No Jumper vlog that I've filmed sitting at this table. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Let me know. Let me know your thoughts. Appreciate it. Congrats. Peace.